Delay.
Yeah.
We now move to the front bench, starting with Chris Stevens, SNP spokesperson.
Well, thank you. Ms McVeigh, it's a pleasure to see you in the chair. And whilst I will not be as impertinent as my good friend from Glasgow East, it is rather disappointing that in this debate we've not heard from one government backbencher during this, because you would think that this is an issue that affects workers right across these islands, across every nation and region of the UK, and I would have expected at least one of them to make a contribution, and it is disappointing that that's not happened. I want to congratulate the Honourable Member for Slough for an excellent speech and for opening the debate, because as someone who, and I'll refer to my register of members' interests, Madam Chair, particularly in my role as Chair of the PCS Parliamentary Group, and my membership of Glasgow City Unison, one of the largest Unison branches in the UK, and I look forward to going to the Unison conference tomorrow to see my fellow Glaswegians who are delegates there. But it is quite clear that this is a practice that's been going on for decades. Like, for example, too long, as the Honourable Member for Strangford says, Glasgow City Council, under Labour control in the 1990s, were using this practice of fire and rehire. And I say that not to make the cheap political point, but to say it's a practice that has, as the Honourable Member for Strangford has said, has been going on for too long. Because my real fear about it is that the threat of fire and rehire, or dismissal and re-engage, to use its legal term, is used as a negotiating tactic before the negotiations even begin. Yep. That some employers have that over trade unions or workers' representatives' heads before the negotiations even start, is that this is what we can do, and that leads to, as we see, cuts in terms and conditions and indeed dismissal and re-engage that's been going on for far too long. And we had, as other honourable members have referred to, the quite disgusting Zoom meeting, fired by Zoom, as they were by P&O ferries, by a particular person who, as I understand it, was a former employee of Royal Mail and was doing exactly the same thing to Royal Mail staff and threatening them, and was not a friend of the worker by any means. But firing staff by Zoom, I think, was one of the most disgusting things that I have ever seen. And frankly, I think the government really should have, at that time, put forward a bill, at least an emergency bill, to deal with fire and rehire, if not had put in the employment bill, which I'll remind the Chamber here, Ms McVeigh, has been in the Conservative Party manifestos of 2015, 2017, and indeed in 2019. And we're still waiting for it 7 years later. And the Minister is quoted, Ms McVeigh, on the 25th of January, not a date that Scots can forget, because it is, of course, Burns Day, was quoted in Hansard on 25th of January and told us that there would be an employment bill in the Queen's speech. There was no employment bill in the Queen's speech, as other honourable members have referred to. And that's important, Ms McVeigh. It's important for a number of reasons, as we're now seeing, because the casualisation that's been talked about, the fire and rehire, interfering with people's worker status and cuts to terms and conditions, impact, as we know, for those of us who sit on the Work and Pension Select Committee, have for the last 3 weeks been discussing the impact that fire and rehire and the lack of employment bill has on occupational pensions, because it affects auto-enrolment to those occupational pensions. So the devastating consequences of fire rehire and the lack of an employment bill has not just on wages, but going forward pensions and occupational pensions as well, which is deferred wages, is quite considerable indeed. So, Ms McVeigh, I am once again going to outline the SNP's complete opposition to the appalling practice of fire and rehire, and I note that most EU countries have some form of block on the practice of fire and rehire, and in some countries it's illegal to do so. And so, once again, we find the United Kingdom is lagging behind Europe when it comes to the protections of workers. And my concern about that is that what this signals is a race to the bottom in standards, as the UK risks falling behind the European Union when it comes to basic workers' rights. And in a cost of living crisis, job security is perhaps more important than it ever will be. To fire workers in this way is wrong in any circumstance, but to do so in the middle of a cost of living crisis and an economic crisis really is, I really question the conscience of the government's thinking going forward by not tackling this by legislative means going forward. And so there needs to be, so reform is long awaited and is crucial, I think, going forward. Now, it's been touched on by many honourable members in this debate, but the impact it has on BAME workers and on women is quite considerable, and I do recommend that the Minister reads the TUC report of January 2021 in relation to in-work poverty and inadequate living standards for many, many workers. We've had in-work poverty debates fairly recently, and I'm sure we will have them going forward, but I'm very concerned that fire and rehire continues to lead to that in-work poverty for many workers across these islands. I want to commend, Mr McVeigh, the work of my honourable friend from Paisley and Renfrewshire North, who has, I think, just concluded his remarks in the Chamber is not in this debate, but he was, of course, the first person to put forward legislation to end the practice of fire and rehire. Because in his constituency, he had Glasgow Airport, so he had the British Airways issues. He had Rolls-Royce in Hillington, and I think he had at least one other employer who was engaging in the practice of fire and rehire. It was quite considerable, the pressures that were on workers in my honourable friend's constituency, and I think that the bill he put forward certainly has my support, the support of my colleagues and many members across the House, and I know that he will probably be tabling that bill tomorrow, and I would encourage all members of the House to support that. He has the support of over 100 MPs who had signed an early day motion urging him to back that particular piece of legislation. So my colleagues in the SNP, as well as myself, have campaigned tirelessly to update current employment laws. Ms McVeigh, I will be tabling a bill tomorrow on this very issue, the Workers' Rights and Definitions Act, and I will, of course, be attaching fire and rehire to that. Now, I know the Minister is listening to me intently, as he always does, so I know that he, on the 29th of March, introduced a new statutory code on the practice of fire and rehire. However, he will be aware that the Trade Union Congress have said his plans lack bite and won't deter rogue employers like P&O from trampling over workers' rights. And I hope that the Minister will take an opportunity to respond to myself with those remarks from the TUC, because while he is introducing the statutory code, I think it's certainly the view of everyone who's spoken in this debate today that there should really be firm legislation to ensure that the practice of fire and rehire is made illegal and ends. I'll now just briefly touch, Ms McVeigh, if I can, that while employment law is reserved to this place, the SNP Scottish Government is, with its Fair Work approach, is committed to doing everything in its power to protect employees from exploitative practices in Scotland throughout the cost of living crisis and beyond. And that must mean meaningful dialogue between employers and employees and their trade unions. And I'm going to say that here, Ms McVeigh, because I suspect we're not going to hear very much of it in the other debate that's going on right now. It certainly wasn't when myself and my honourable friend for Slough were in the chamber. So I look forward to the Minister telling us that there is going to be legislation a date for an employment bill to not just tackle fire and rehire, but the many other exploitative practices that are taking place across these islands, and because, as other members have outlined, an employment bill to protect workers' rights is needed now more than it's ever been.
Justin Madders.